Denver Broncos quarterback Jarrett Stidham is lighting it up in the preseason, but there is no quarterback controversy, folks, and we'll tell you why here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You know, it's your team every day for all your Broncos news, content coverage, analysis, and more. Special shout out to all the everydayers out there. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, what are you waiting for? Become one. Hit that little subscribe or that follow button wherever you get your podcast so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team to bring you up to date with everything that's going on in Broncos country. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. We got a lot to break down here on this Aftermath Monday episode of the show following the Broncos' second preseason games. Jarrett Stidham, he is lighting it up at the quarterback position here for the Broncos in the preseason. But there is no quarterback controversy, so stop trying to make it a thing. We'll tell you about that, why we feel so strongly about that as well. And then we'll go through as the Broncos are navigating some injuries at fullback. They're bringing in a former familiar face. And on top of that, could one of these younger tight ends creep up into the mix for the 53 after 2 weeks of preseason play? And then we all know the news. We heard it on Sunday that the Cincinnati Bengals were likely going to trade Trey Hendrickson. And we'll tell you why it's unlikely the Broncos become a destination for someone who has ties to Sean Payton. You'll get all that on today's episode of the show. Sayre, my friend, look, man, I've been enjoying the preseason. We've been enjoying training camp and the buildup, and certainly Jarrett Stidham's name has had a lot of traction on it because he's been very steady. Everyone's calling him Steady Stidham, which is a very fair name there. But once again, as we see in this media game, as we see for people who need clicks, who need, just relevancy on social media, people are trying to stir up a quarterback controversy for the Broncos, saying that Jarrett Stidham should be starting over Bo Nix. This is, I'm going to come out and say it. It's flat out stupid. It shouldn't be happening. Your thoughts on this, because I feel like we can really expand on it and also highlight at the same time why Jarrett Stidham is in the perfect spot right now.
Well, it's an epidemic, Cody. Every year around this time, I feel like the backup quarterback, for some team, if not always the Denver Broncos, almost 100% of the time gets so much attention and gets so much hype, and it does get out of control. And I get it. At this point in time, for the majority of the last 10 years, like, we've been rooting for whoever has played the best in the preseason to be the starter because there's been no solidified starter. But a lot of times, go figure, these guys go out there against a bunch of other backups and they just dominate, or they look really good. And then you go out against starters in the regular season when teams are actually game planning to play against you with their starters, and it just doesn't go quite the same, right? I mean, we saw it last year with Bo Nix, where he was kind of dominating second and third stringers in the preseason, comes out at the beginning of the regular season, and we'll call it a little acclimation period for his first month of NFL football there. It was tough for Bo. So it's just one of the things that I think fan bases do across the league is, go pining for the backup quarterback, because it's always the devil you know versus the devil you don't. But it's one thing to hear fans calling for a backup quarterback, Cody. It's a whole other thing to hear media members actually pushing this narrative that a player like Stidham, who, there's no offense meant to Stidham here. I mean, he should be a starter probably somewhere, but not for the Denver Broncos, where your own head coach has recently said they believe that Bo Nix can be a top 4 or 5 quarterback in this league.
And what have we seen historically over time? You and I have talked about this probably since you joined the show. I think, what was that, back in 2019, 2020, something along those lines? That's when you kind of jumped in here. But we've heard it, like, in today's NFL, it is so imperative that you have a quality, good caliber backup quarterback behind your starter in the event something were to happen to your starter. And I think if we follow Sean Payton's history and his trend, what have we seen? Like when Drew Brees was his QB in New Orleans, and Drew had the finger or the thumb injury and he couldn't play for a while, they had Teddy Bridgewater. And Sean Payton just recently told this story about, Drew was going through the recovery process. They had Teddy, they went 5-0, and Sean called up Drew and said, hey, how's recovery going? Don't worry. You don't need to rush back necessarily. But I think Sean, out of anybody, understands the importance of we need a really good backup, someone who knows this system in the event something happens to Bo. Now, here's where Jarrett Stidham comes into play. I think the benefit that Jarrett has here on this roster as the backup to Bo, he has 3 years worth of valuable experience here. And when you look at Stidham, he can do things in this offense that, are a little bit different than Bo. Bo athletically, I think, can do more. Stidham is at this point now where he's just mastered the concepts of what Sean has said. We caught up with Jarrett after the game in the locker room. One of the things he said about this being his 3rd year, he says it's really about learning the system. And now that I know the system coming out here, it's about reading the defense pre-snap and identifying how I can manipulate what they're in defensively to better serve our offense. That's a mastery process that comes about here when you get reps and you just get time inside the same system with, guess what? Same offensive play color, same quarterback coach, continuity being a major key here. Yes, Jarrett Stidham is lighting it up in the preseason, folks. I mean, right now he's 30 of 38 passing in 2 preseason games for 376 yards and 4 touchdowns and a rating of 143.0. Great. But you know what I see when I see Jarrett Stidham play? I see Jarrett doing exactly what he should do if he's leading those twos, if he's the backup quarterback. He is leading a dominant onslaught against people that the Broncos should dominate in that sense, which highlights, I think, the Broncos' depth is better than a lot of teams right now in the NFL.
You and I actually discussed this on an episode. I can't remember if it was leading up to this Cardinals game or if it was leading up to the 49ers game, but you and I kind of talked about how these backup quarterbacks for the Broncos should dominate because, well, for Jarrett Stidham, it's his 3rd year in the Sean Payton offense. And for Sam Ehlinger, it's obviously he's played a ton in the preseason. So he should be out there playing well against 3rd string guys. And so for Jarrett Stidham, Cody, here's the deal. He's not playing well just because he's going against backups. We understand that. We understand that he's like legitimately dominating. He's proving that he's okay. Yeah, he should be playing at a different level, essentially. If this was like a baseball analogy, it'd be like a AAA guy hitting for 500 or something like that. It's just he's playing in the wrong league right now. He's at the wrong level. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that he should be the starter for the Denver Broncos, right? Not in any way, shape, or form. He is serving such a valuable purpose for this team now. In fact, I think while there's a school of thought that's understandable to say, okay, he's now raised his value to the point that the Broncos could get something nice in a trade, I would say he's raised his value to the point that they legitimately can't trade him. Like, if something happens to Bo Nix and you traded Jarrett Stidham just to get a draft pick, unless it's like a really high pick, and if you just trade him to get a draft pick and then you end up needing him this season in a year where Sean Payton said, we believe this is a Super Bowl caliber team, like this is a special team, you don't trade a high quality backup quarterback away from a roster like that. Just ask the previous Super Bowl champion Denver Broncos. How many games did Bubby Brister play back in the 90s? How many games did Brock Osweiler play in 2015? Don't even mess around with this stuff and keep Jarrett Stidham around, reevaluate after the season's over.
Yeah, folks, and look, I'm going to say it bluntly. I said it in my post-game report over there at milehighsports.com. If there's anybody that's telling you that the Broncos should start Jarrett Stidham or that they're trying to make a quarterback controversy, please stop listening to them. Please stop doing that because it just spreads like wildfire on social media. Understand, Bo Nix is the franchise quarterback here. Jarrett Stidham is a really good backup player. He's in a great environment right now, and there's value to be had that. If the Broncos had any interest in trading Jarrett Stidham, they could have done it last year when, he had quarterbacks in the regular season going down with injuries left and right. They could have traded either Zach Wilson or Jarrett Stidham. They didn't do that, even though there were some teams that were interested. Jarrett, I think, likes his situation. Of course, would Jarrett like to be starting somewhere? I'm sure that's probably the case. He was bummed he wasn't named the starter last year when Bo was a rookie during the initial competition. But I also think Jarrett understands that he's in a great environment right now and that you never know what can happen in the NFL because he could go to the New Orleans Saints. Like, I think he'd be an evident upgrade to the New Orleans Saints quarterback room right now today. But is that a great environment for him to go and succeed? No, I don't believe that in any way, shape, or form. So it's just the little pieces, the context there. No quarterback controversy here in the Mile High City. Broncos Country, don't make fetch a thing. It ain't happening here. Taking a phrase out of my good friend Sayre Bedinger. And obviously, a little Mean Girls playbook there. But let's not subscribe to that line of thinking here, Broncos Country. Let us know your thoughts here because this has obviously been a topic that has kind of circulated throughout training camp and obviously now the preseason after 2 strong games by Jarrett Stidham. your thoughts on his positioning. Should the Broncos keep him in deck, or should they maybe listen to other players or other teams about maybe sending him elsewhere? I think you should stay right here in the Mile High City. Let us know your thoughts here. Broncos Country, we're not done. We still got a lot to discuss here on today's episode of the show, including the Broncos bringing back an old friend at the fullback position and someone who has ties to Sean Payton. Adam Prentice is back in the building. But what does it mean for Michael Burton, Nate Adkins, and maybe even the tight end room? We'll share our thoughts on that and more here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
This episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything. Cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes, but how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real, personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on someone you saw on social media.
Life doesn't come with a playbook or a manual that tells you how to navigate all of life's ups and downs, the unexpected curveballs, but it is important to check in with yourself. I've utilized BetterHelp therapy before in the past, and I loved it. I was connected to a therapist within minutes of filling out a form, set up my sessions, and I got a lot of valuable insight into myself and better ways that I can manage my time, coping skills, all these things inside of BetterHelp. And if you don't vibe well with your therapist, you can change therapists at any time at no additional cost. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
The ties that bind are always fascinating in the NFL. So the Broncos are bringing back a guy who is not only a former Bronco, but he's also a former player under Sean Payton. Fullback Adam Prentice. He is back in the fold. Broncos Country, a little blast from the past, here to join this fullback group, I guess, that the Broncos kind of have right now, which it makes an interesting discussion for Michael Burton, Nate Adkins, other tight ends on this roster. What are the Denver Broncos going to be doing here? Does this shuffle up the 53-man roster a little bit? We're going to talk about that on today's episode, Broncos Country, but want to say thank you to every single one of you that rocks with us every single day. We appreciate you making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day. Hit subscribe if you haven't already done so, wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Let's talk about the homecoming of Adam Prentice. Cody, the Broncos once upon a time signed him as an undrafted free agent out of South Carolina. And ultimately, he was kind of stolen away by the New Orleans Saints and Sean Payton. We know Sean is one of the few coaches in the NFL who really utilizes the fullback on a consistent basis. This, to me, would indicate that obviously you're going to be without Nate Adkins. We heard from Sean a couple of days ago. We heard from him that Nate Adkins is going to be out for a bit, and then Michael Burton suffers a hamstring injury against the Cardinals in joint practice. So really, you look at this, and you and I talked about a preseason kind of underrated player to watch as well. This feels like a move that is for the 53, although maybe it's get Prentice up to speed. What's your read on this?
Yeah, I mean, it could be one of those reasons of, hey, we're low at this position, or maybe this is going to be a lot longer than we thought in terms of maybe Michael Burton. He could be out several weeks. We don't know. We don't know that timeline just yet. I just know that the Broncos, they did practice on Sunday, literally hours after their game on Saturday evening, and Sean Payton's trying to build that callousness there. But for me, in order to make room for Adam Prentice coming onto the roster, they did place Nick Gargiulo, the offensive guard, on injured reserve. His season is over after suffering that brutal-looking injury in Saturday's preseason win. So that was the roster move, the corresponding one to make way for him here. I'm very curious here because we know, you can't put Nate Adkins on IR right now, because if you do, it ends his season. He won't be able to return in the regular season. So how I expect this to go is that when roster cuts happen, Nate Adkins will initially make the 53-man roster. Then I think once the roster cut down happens, then you'll see him being placed on short-term injured reserve. Will be out at least a minimum of 4 weeks, and then they can activate his 21-day window at that point, anytime after that 4 weeks, and he can return. But Michael Burton last year was also one of those veteran placeholders that the Broncos released initially and then brought right back onto the practice squad just for the numbers game. Lil Jordan Humphrey was the other guy there in that exception. I don't know if this is it for Michael Burton in Denver. I don't know. I mean, we don't have a prognosis on his timeline, but the fact that they are bringing in Adam Prentice, who's got familiarity with Sean's offense, kind of tells me that there is this sense that this could be something that lingers, and that Prentice could be the one guy that by default is someone that Sean knows, hey, I know what I'm getting from this guy on a week-to-week basis, right? Like guys like Chris Manhurts that he brought in at tight end. I find this to be very interesting. It's not going to be predominantly used here in terms of him using a fullback like Prentice, but Prentice can also play special teams as well. So I think this is something that we monitor throughout the week, but I also can't help but look at maybe how this impacts the tight end position and the depth a little bit as well. Because as we talked about in the pregame show, in the kind of the buildup there, Caden Prescorn was playing that fullback role here for the Broncos and also had some plays at the tight end. Of course, had the one play in the late in the night where he's getting ready to cross the end zone. The ball gets punched out. It's a touchback. While that was a negative play for him, I still think that, man, he has shown flashes. He's flashed more so than Caleb Lohner, which is disappointing to say because we had well, we should temper that. I don't know if we had high expectation. We had high excitement for Caleb Lohner, and maybe he's still developing. He's not quite there yet, but Prescorn also looks like a guy who could play that fullback position and play tight end for Sean. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on Prescorn and also how it maybe impacts things with Adam Prentice?
Yeah, I feel like Prescorn is for sure a practice squad guy. It would be, honestly, I would be surprised if he made the 53-man roster, not because he's bad or anything like that, but I think because there's other guys that could be out there in the NFL who have experience, who would provide you with what you're kind of missing right now. And let's make no mistake about it. I mean, Nate Adkins played a lot for the Broncos last year, offense and special teams. The same is true of Michael Burton. So if you're losing both of those guys from your roster last year, you have to replace what they do for your team in some way, shape, or form, right? And so that's why you bring in somebody like an Adam Prentice, who has played for Sean Payton, who has played under Darren Rizzi as well on special teams. That's an important factor there. But I think the tight end position now becomes one that the Broncos will be scouring on the waiver wire, maybe in trade talks, if they can get something for, a player for player deal like we saw on Sunday between the Eagles and the Texans. You just never know when you can get something done to bring in some depth. And I think that's what the Broncos do need right now, is a depth piece at the tight end position who is proven, that could maybe soften the blow. Maybe we'll know this, Cody. We'll maybe know if the Broncos are going to try to sneak Caleb Lohner through to the practice squad if they do make any sort of substantial move at tight end, whether that's bringing in a free agent or trading for somebody. Because ultimately, I don't know we talked about, and I've said this, and sometimes you can't go back on what you say if you're drafting a guy like this, but I've consistently said, like, Caleb Lohner was drafted, therefore he's going to make the team because the Broncos believe in his long-term potential, and they drafted him because they don't want to risk anyone else getting him. So why would you subject him to waivers? That's going to be the fascinating wrinkle in this whole thing to watch right now. So I just feel like roster wise, you've set yourself up now to where you do have to add somebody with a little experience, and we'll find out what that looks like, or if they just plan on it being Prentice until Adkins can come back.
Yeah, I'm curious to see maybe what the vision is here. We'll have a chance to meet with Sean on Tuesday as the Broncos return back to training camp. Obviously, the general practices are closed here to the public, so there won't be the live tweeting experience that Broncos fans have been accustomed to since the start of training camp. But that's something we'll probably bring up with Sean in terms of why he brought Prentice in, and is there timelines? Because Sean, for some reason, this offseason has been pretty open with the injury stuff. I imagine once the regular season rolls around, it's going to change a little bit, but I'm very curious for it as well. And look, you mentioned it's the ties that bind. It's who you know in the NFL today. And for Prentice, if they believe he's going to come in and do a job that they need him to do because someone else is not going to be able to do it, it makes sense to make this type of move now, even though that Prentice hasn't been in Sean Payton's offense for, quite a bit of time at this point. So I think this is something we'll obviously continue to monitor throughout the week. Do you see a scenario here, Sayre, where maybe the Broncos, because of the numbers game we're talking about offensively, defensively with the depth, do you see where maybe they bring 3 tight ends onto the 53, sneak the other guys in? And obviously we know it's going to be Evan Ingram, Adam Troutman, but who is that third guy right now? Is it Lohner or is it Lucas Kroll at this point? And you can sneak the other guys on.
I think it would be Lohner at this point, and I think you could bring somebody onto your practice squad who, as we've seen with teams bringing veterans onto the practice squad, you bring guys in who could contribute and get shuffled up onto the roster. It's basically like having an extra roster spot. And something that I did look up too while we were chatting here, Cody, is that the IR designation too can help out for the Broncos, because they could place Adkins on at the time of 53-man roster cuts, and they could bring him back. The NFL kind of nixed that rule where you have to keep a guy on IR if he's placed on it now. You can designate him to come back, but it's a minimum of 4 games if you say it now.
Yeah.
So maybe they're going to say, hey, he's not going to miss 4 games, so we're not going to cement that. So that's the only thing with that IR designation is they could
so
say,
that's
hey,
for when the
that's
53-man roster, like when the cuts
that's
are
for
actually
now.
happening. It can't happen
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, that can happen now. So they
Okay.
could do that. They
Curious.
could bring guys back now. It just changed last year. So it's like
Okay.
I'm with you. I still, when I'm putting together my rosters, I'm still thinking to myself, hey, like Drew Sanders going to have to make the team and then go to IR or whatever they're planning. So that type of stuff, but that did just change in the
Good.
NFL. So that is a nice, advantage for the Broncos that they don't have to, compromise whoever they actually want to keep on this team by, doing those sorts of gymnastics, so to speak. It just eliminates it's a stupid rule that the NFL had in the first place.
Well, Broncos Country, want to know your thoughts here on Adam Prentice, the fullback tight end position. How do you see things kind of shaping as we approach the final week of the NFL preseason? Broncos Country, we're not done yet, though. Headlines are circulating around the NFL that Trey Hendrickson and the Cincinnati Bengals are more than likely heading towards an amicable trade. We'll tell you why it's unlikely the Broncos get in on the mix despite Hendrickson's ties to Sean Payton here on today's episode of the show.
This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff, it's almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, myself, Cody Roark, we're going to be playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league.
Well, and to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. And to kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues. It's a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season right around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Trey Hendrickson is likely to be traded by the Cincinnati Bengals, but he's unlikely to land in the Mile High City despite the ties that bind here. We'll break this down here on today's episode of the show real quick. I want to say thanks once again to everyone in Broncos Country. Thank you for being the everydayers out there who make this show exactly what it is. Sayre, I mean, obviously, anytime someone's going to get traded, a big name or, a player at a position that everyone's like, maybe we could add another guy like this. I know throughout this entire offseason, Trey Hendrickson has kind of been this name that Broncos fans on social media have kind of thrown out as, hey, maybe the Broncos could trade for this guy. We know the contract controversy over there in Cincinnati, the way that they do things. Certainly it's not appealing for free agents, for first-round draft picks and things like that. But for the Broncos now, after just signing Zach Allen to an extension, I've already seen it on my feed. I don't know what's like on your feed. I've been asked questions. Will the Broncos look into trading for a guy like Trey Hendrickson? And to my understanding, the Broncos aren't interested. I'm sure that if there was a way to make it happen, they would. But with where this team is at right now, a trade for Trey Hendrickson, despite his ties of playing for Sean Payton previously, it doesn't seem like it's likely to happen.
Right, because Trey Hendrickson, at the end of the day, yes, he's probably more of a traditional like 4-3 type of defensive end, a bigger body there off the edge, but he's still an edge player. And therefore, you have Jonathan Cooper, you have Nick Bonitto, you have Jonah Ellis, who's looked great in the preseason, Dondre Tillman. I'm not saying that Trey Hendrickson's not better than those guys because, I mean, shoot, the guy's got 6 sacks or something like that the last 2 seasons. He's an absolute freak there. So, of course, you're talking about adding a premier player, but you're talking about compromising young guys that you already have in place. You're talking about paying a guy a big money contract when you already have other players that you're trying to pay, and you're talking about giving up valuable NFL draft capital when the Broncos do need to start looking at stocking up the cupboard at other positions like offensive line. They need to start using more high picks on the interior defensive line themselves and potentially other positions as well. So it's just one of those situations situations to where, shoot, you'd love to see Trey Hendrickson return to playing for Sean Payton, where Sean drafted him in New Orleans back in 2017 when he was part of that amazing draft. Was it 2017 or 16? One of the two. One of those two, when he was with Alvin Kamara and all those other guys. It was just an amazing draft class that they had, one of the best ever. But Trey was kind of one of those underrated picks, and somebody that you certainly, if I was Sean Payton, Cody, that would be one of those that I brag about when I'm golfing with my buddies. Like, man, it's hard to believe we got Trey Hendrickson where we did, isn't it? I mean, guy played at, something tech or something like that. I can't even remember. He was nobody in the pre-draft process. So, of course, Sean Payton loves the guy, I'm sure. But is it the right timing and situation for the Broncos? There's so many teams out there that are desperate. Lions, Commanders, off the top of my head, Chargers in our own division who need somebody. The Titans that the Broncos will play week 1. So many other teams, Panthers, need Trey Hendrickson way more than Denver and would be way more motivated to get a deal done, I think.
Yeah, and obviously we know that the Bengals, they're looking for, a player in exchange, and I'm sure obviously Premier Capital. And, in my head when this was being brought up, I was like, all right, maybe the only way I can see it, and this is not going to happen, this is not realistic, but it's like if the Broncos, if Trey Hendrickson was willing to go somewhere that maybe he preferred for 1 year, even without an extension, I could see it work. Like if Denver traded JFM for Trey Hendrickson and maybe, a few draft picks, you only get this one season with him. There's no guarantee. Whereas that's the stupid business move for Trey Hendrickson. If I'm Trey Hendrickson and I want to be traded, if I'm going somewhere, I am not going to, I don't want to be traded. Essentially, I'm not going to report for that team until I sign an extension with the team that's trading for me, right? That's the smart business move here, because this isn't Madden. I mean, the reason Trey Hendrickson isn't reporting or playing for the Bengals right now is because they haven't extended him. So you think he's going to go out there in a year where he's in the last year of his deal and he's going to go risk a major injury and potentially lose out on more money after being the NFL sack leader? That doesn't seem like anything that he'd do, and I'm sure his representation is on top of that, though it would be nice for Sean Payton and Trey Hendrickson to reunite, because I do think, like, hey, if you were to plug Trey Hendrickson opposite of Zach Allen, next to G.J. Jones, next to, Nick Bonitto, Jonathan Cooper, I mean, man, that Broncos D-line just gets a little bit scarier, especially with a healthy Dre Greenlaw, Alex Singleton. Then we're really talking about a very scary defense here. But it's nice sometimes to think about what the fantasy world's going to look like. But the reality is we live in the real world. Well, that's not going to be something that happens here for the Broncos. So as nice as it would be, Broncos country, Denver is unlikely to trade for Trey Hendrickson here. Sayre, in your opinion here, kind of maybe shifting this focus away from the Trey Hendrickson talk a little bit, there is one more important thing that the Broncos have to do, and it could come to fruition before the regular season happens, and that is a Nick Bonitto contract extension. Our good friend Mike Kliss on 9 News dropped a little nugget on the broadcast before the game on Saturday.
Yeah, he was talking. Actually, it was even during the game. He was asked the question just straight up by the 9 News broadcast crew.
Micah Parsons
and Ryan Harris. They were talking about Micah Parsons. Absolutely, Cody. They were. That was funny. That I had a good laugh about that. Everyone else did as well. So those guys are just going to have to laugh that one off themselves and just, move beyond that. But yeah, Mike Kliss had said on the broadcast, because he was asked the question, hey, what do you see as the timeline for this type of deal getting done? Like, is it going to happen before the season? What could the price be? And Mike made the note that Nick Bonitto shares an agent with Pat Surtain. And because of that, he's like, you know what? How about a similar scenario to what we saw with PS2 last year, where Pat got his deal 4 days before the start of the regular season. They got the deal done. It was kind of set in stone from there. I mean, I don't think he was necessarily calling his shot to say, hey, 4 days before the regular season, that's the drop dead date. But I think what he was effectively saying is that, hey, before the start of the regular season, it seems like something could happen. So really fun potential there for the Broncos, and for you and I to potentially do a bonus episode of the show here at some point in the next handful of days, because the regular season, Cody, I didn't even realize it is really creeping up on us here.
Yeah, it is. I mean, final preseason game this upcoming Saturday. That's like a morning game. I think 10:30, 11 a.m. Mountain Time over here for us. We'll have the post-game coverage. We'll have the build-up to that final game. Roster cuts right afterwards. Like, we're going to be very busy here, Broncos country. We want to make sure that you are locked in to Locked On Broncos every single day. If you're not an everydayer, now is the perfect time to become one, because we're going to be bringing the heat for you every single day with what's going on with your favorite team. We appreciate you so much, Broncos Country. Thanks for making us your first listen and rocking with us for your second listen of the day. Make sure you go check out our friends over there at the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get ready for your fantasy drafts with the season approaching. With that said, for all you everydayers, here's a preview of what you're going to get on tomorrow's episode of the show. Sayre Bedinger, myself, we're going to sit down and we're each going to share our 53-man roster predictions after week 2 of the NFL preseason. We are 1 week away. We have a really good pulse on maybe how this might go, but we also want you to send yours in as well. Tomorrow's episode of the show is a 53-man roster prediction. We'll see you then.